The AI skills everyone will need. Somewhere in the last 2 years, a quiet split happened. Not between people who use AI and people who don't. Almost everyone uses it now. The split is between people who are getting sharper because of it and people who are slowly, almost invisibly, getting duller. And the strange part is you can't tell which side you're on just by looking at your output. Both groups are producing more, moving faster, answering emails in half the time. The difference doesn't show up in what they make. It shows up years later in how well they can still think when the tool isn't there. I've spent a long time watching how people use these systems, and I've come to believe there's a small set of skills that decide which side of that split you end up on, not technical skills. Not prompting tricks, something closer to character. Let me walk you through them. The first one is discernment, and it matters more than any other skill on this list because it's the one that protects all the others. Discernment is the ability to tell a good answer from a convincing answer, and those are not the same thing. AI is extraordinarily good at sounding right. It has absorbed the rhythm of expertise, the cadence of confidence, the structure of a well-reasoned argument, and it can produce all of that whether or not the underlying content is actually true. Most people were never trained to separate those two things, because for most of history, if something sounded authoritative, it usually came from someone who had earned that authority. That assumption is now broken, and almost nobody has updated their instincts to match. You'll ask a question, get a fluent, well-organized, oddly specific answer, and something in you will relax because it feels like the kind of answer a smart person would give. That feeling is not evidence, it's a texture. Discernment is the discipline of noticing that texture and asking a separate question underneath it. Not does this sound right, but is this actually right, and how would I know the difference? I think about a small business owner I heard about who asked an AI system to explain a tax rule that applied to her situation. The answer came back specific, confident, formatted like something out of a manual, complete with a number. She acted on that number. It was wrong, not wildly wrong, just wrong enough to cost her real money months later when the actual rule caught up with her. Nobody lied to her. The system wasn't trying to deceive her. It simply produced something that sounded exactly like the truth, because sounding like the truth is the one thing it's been trained to do better than almost anything else. People who build discernment start treating every confident answer as a hypothesis instead of a conclusion. People who don't will build entire decisions, businesses, even relationships on top of things that were never actually checked, just fluently stated. The second skill is knowing what not to outsource, and this is the one people get wrong in the most costly way because it doesn't fail immediately. It fails slowly. There is a version of using AI that makes you sharper, where you hand off the parts of a task that were never where your value lived, the formatting, the first draft, the tedious research. And you keep the parts that actually build your judgment, the decisions, the framing, the point of view. And there's another version where you quietly hand off the thinking itself, not because you decided to, but because it was easier, and easier things get repeated until they become the default. The problem is that judgment is a muscle, and muscles that stop working start to shrink. A writer who lets AI make every structural decision doesn't just save time, they stop practicing the specific kind of thinking that makes someone a writer in the first place. A student who lets it solve every problem doesn't just finish homework faster, they graduate having never actually struggled with the material that struggle was supposed to build. I know someone who manages a small team, and for a year he let AI draft every difficult message he needed to send, every piece of feedback, every hard conversation reframed into something polished. It worked, the messages were clear and well written. But when a real crisis hit, a conversation with no time to draft anything, he realized he'd lost the feel for how to say a hard thing directly to another person. The skill hadn't disappeared overnight, it had just gone quiet from lack of use, the way any capability does when something else keeps doing the work for you. The skill here isn't refusing to use the tool. It's asking before every task a very specific question. Is this the kind of thing I need to stay good at, or is this the kind of thing I never needed to be good at in the first place? Get that question wrong consistently, and you wake up in 5 years technically more productive and genuinely less capable. And you won't notice until you're tested in a moment the tool can't help you with. The third skill is verification instinct, which sounds close to discernment but is actually more physical, more habitual. Discernment is the judgment. Verification is the reflex that puts that judgment into action before a mistake becomes permanent. This is the skill of pausing just for a moment on anything that matters and asking where this actually came from and whether you can confirm it independently before you act on it, repeat it, or build on top of it. It's a small habit, almost boring to describe, but it's the difference between someone who gets embarrassed once in a meeting because they repeated something false with total confidence, and someone who never does because they built a reflex of checking the things that carry weight before they let those things leave their mouth. This matters more now than it ever has because the volume of confident-sounding, plausible, occasionally wrong information available to you has multiplied. While the average person's habit of checking it has stayed exactly where it was. Think about how differently this used to work. A generation ago, if you wanted to state something as fact in front of other people, there was usually some friction involved in finding it, a book to open, a person to call, a source to track down. And that friction accidentally built a habit of verification into the process itself. That friction is gone now. An answer arrives in under a second, fully formed, and the temptation is to treat the speed of the answer as if it were evidence of its accuracy. It isn't, it never was. The people who protect themselves aren't the most skeptical people in the room. They're the people who have made verification automatic for anything that actually matters, the way some people automatically double-check a door is locked without even thinking about it. Not out of anxiety, just out of habit built over years of understanding what's actually at stake when they're wrong. The fourth skill is the ability to ask a real question, and I don't mean typing a prompt correctly. I mean something older and more fundamental, the actual clarity of thought required to know what you're trying to find out. Most people who feel like AI gave them a disappointing answer weren't failed by the tool. They were failed by their own question because the question was vague, or it was really 3 questions stitched together. Or it was asking for an answer when what they actually needed was a better version of the problem itself. This is not a new skill invented by AI, it's an old skill that AI has suddenly made visible. Good thinkers have always known how to break a large, foggy problem into smaller, specific, answerable pieces. That's not a technical talent, it's clarity of mind applied to a question before you go looking for the answer. The people getting genuinely useful things out of these tools aren't smarter than everyone else. They've simply done the harder work first, the work of figuring out precisely what they're asking and precisely why before they ever type a word. Everyone else is handing over confusion and hoping the tool untangles it for them, and sometimes it does, but what it hands back is only ever as clear as what you handed in. The fifth skill, and maybe the quietest one, is taste. Taste is the judgment that tells you something is actually good, not technically correct, not well structured, not free of errors, but genuinely good, resonant, worth someone's time. AI can produce something competent almost instantly. It cannot tell you whether that competent thing is actually worth making. That gap between competent and good is exactly where taste lives, and it is not something you can prompt your way into. It's built the slow way through exposure, through paying attention to what moves you and why. Through making things badly for long enough to start noticing the difference between adequate and excellent. I've watched 2 people use the exact same tool to write the exact same kind of message, and one produces something forgettable, technically fine, instantly generic, while the other produces something that actually lands, not because they know some secret command, but because they knew the moment they read the first draft that it wasn't good enough yet. And they kept pushing until it was. That instinct, the ability to feel the gap between fine and actually good, was built long before either of them opened the tool. In a world producing an overwhelming volume of competent, AI-assisted output, taste becomes the rarest resource because it's the one thing that can't be generated on demand. The people whose work stands out over the next decade won't be the ones who used AI the most. They'll be the ones who used it as a tool in service of a taste they had already spent years developing, and who could tell every single time when the output wasn't good enough yet, even if they couldn't always say exactly why. None of these 5 skills are about resisting AI, and none of them are about mastering some clever technique. They're about protecting something older than the technology itself: your own judgment, your own capacity to think clearly when nothing is doing it for you. Discernment protects you from mistaking confidence for truth. Knowing what not to outsource protects the muscle that makes you capable in the first place. Verification protects you from building on things you never actually checked. Asking real questions protects you from confusing a vague feeling with an actual problem. And taste protects the one thing no system can hand you: the sense of what's genuinely worth making. You don't need to master all 5 overnight, and you don't need to treat AI as something to be feared or avoided. You just need to stay awake while you use it, because the tool will keep getting more capable, but the parts of you it can't replace only stay sharp if you keep using them on purpose. That's the whole difference in the end between the people who get quietly duller and the people who get sharper. Not the tool they had access to, what they refused to hand over.